Welcome to the HR Chat Show, one of the world's most downloaded and shared podcasts designed for HR pros, talent execs, tech enthusiasts, and business leaders. For hundreds more episodes and what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.
Hey everybody, this is Bob Goodwin, President of Career Club, and welcome to another episode of HR Chat. Thank you to my good friend Bill Banham and the folks at HR Gazette for allowing me to guest host every once in a while. It's a pleasure to be with you guys today. It's especially a pleasure today because I'm joined by Jackie Dube, who is the Chief People Officer at the Predictive Index Company. Jackie, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. So excited to be here today.
No, I'm excited to have you. We've gotten to know each other over the past few weeks, and you've got some very interesting stories to share. I think some best practices and lessons learned to share. Clearly, the use of assessments, I think, is very interesting to people. And the Predictive Index is obviously one of the name brand ones out there. It's been around for a while. Where I wanted to start off, first of all, just let people get to know you a little bit as a human being first. Where are you calling in from? Where do you live now?
Sure. I'm calling in from the great small state of Rhode Island. So I live in a little sailing city called Newport, Rhode Island. And I've been here for, more than half my life. So I went to college in Rhode Island and never left. So
nice.
Here I am.
Well, having been to Newport, that is a beautiful spot. So you were born and raised in Rhode Island or not?
Nope. I was born actually in Basel, Switzerland. My parents were transferred there for 2 years. And no, I'm not a dual citizen. Everyone always asks. But I did grow up in the also small, great state of New Jersey. So I went to college, I mentioned, up in Rhode Island and kind of never left this area. So
Very
I love
cool.
it.
And when you're not being an amazing chief people officer, what do we find you doing?
So you'll find me doing a couple of things. So I have a wonderful family. I have two girls, one in college and one in high school. So still in transferring them around. So we don't have a license for the younger one for like 18 days. So we're counting those. But I run. So I've run 5 marathons, multiple half marathons.
Oh my gosh.
And I am not an amazing tennis player, but gosh darn do I try. So those are the things you'll find me doing.
Where's the Tennis Hall of Fame? Is it around you?
It is. And actually, that's my club. So it is about 1.5 miles from my house. It's right up on Memorial Boulevard in Newport. So you should visit when you're around.
If you ever find yourself in Cincinnati, you need to come to the tennis event that we have every year in August. It's a tune-up for the U.S. Open, as you probably know. And everybody's here every year. It's very, very fun.
I have actually always wanted to go to the Cincinnati Open, so maybe one year. It's so hard to leave Newport in the summer, though.
Trust me, you find me on your doorstep. All right, let's get into it. So very quickly, maybe this is the proper way to set the stage. Do you mind just explaining just a little bit about the Predictive Index for people who may not be familiar with it? And then I don't want to spend a ton of time on that. We'll get into your all's processes and things, but just for somebody who may not have familiarity at all with it.
Sure. So the Predictive Index is a talent optimization platform. We have a behavioral assessment, a job assessment, a cognitive assessment, but it's much more than that. So the platform, the science, technology, and services. So we have a network of partners that help service the talent optimization, but it's all around helping companies to hire the right people, inspiring them to perform, using the data to design winning performing teams, and then continually measuring that engagement. So the platform does all of those things. I do think it might be helpful to just give some perspective on how I came to be at the Predictive Index.
Please, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, so I've been in HR for over 25 years, so since I graduated from college. And back in 2009, I was in the job hunt. The company that I just worked for filed for bankruptcy. And I bumped into Mike Sani, who's the current CEO of the Predictive Index. And at the time, he was taking over as a CEO for a startup which had 9 people in it. And he had just used the Predictive Index for the first time at his previous investment and brought it over to this new organization. And I had never used it. I never really used assessments in any of my practices. And Mike was like, we have 9 people. We're going to grow this company. We should do it intentionally. And this is one way in which you can make sure that you are intentionally hiring the right people to do the job that you're trying to get them to do. Now, back then, the technology was like way different. It was just an assessment, and you needed a consultant to interpret it. We've come very far from there. But the science was so powerful in decoding humans and really understanding what drives them and understanding more about jobs, that when I left that company, it was a requirement for me to take wherever I went. So I went to another startup company as a change agent. We sold that company. Then I started my own consulting practice and was lucky enough to have a first client that used the predictive index, and my network just expanded from there. And then when Mike, my former CEO, actually bought the predictive index in 2014 with his partner, they became a client of mine. They knew they were going to change the company. They needed to hire a whole bunch of new people. They knew the type of culture they wanted to build. And then a year later, I found my dream job, and I've been here for 10 years as we've kind of grown the company. So, it's really not necessarily, I love PI, but it is about understanding humans and what drives them and the power that has, where so many times, as HR people or leaders in businesses, we're always looking at the resume, like what did they do before? Because that's going to predict what I want them to do. And that's actually not the case. So I just found the science to be so powerful.
No, well, first of all, I appreciate you setting that context, because you're right. I mean, you were a user of it and became a believer in it before you worked there, which makes this much more than a job, I'm sure,
Yes.
for you, because
it's a dream job.
You get to share the good news.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do want to say one other thing, since we're speaking to a lot of HR people. You use the word or the phrase like decoding human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I was given a talk a couple weeks ago, and the CEO has got strategy and all this kind of complicated stuff. The CFO's got capital markets and doing everything with all the accounting and finance, and all that's pretty complicated. You've got the IT person, Lord knows they're dealing with artificial intelligence and whatever else. HR people easily have the hardest job, because you've got the most complex thing that you're trying to understand, manage, help optimize, to use your earlier word. And there's nothing more complicated in the universe than a human being. And that's what HR people are charged with. So tons of respect, I guess, is basically what
And anything that you can use to help understand that. And, on that note, like we talk about all the time, is that in every other area, you mentioned a CEO has a strategy and uses all of this data and metrics to predict or measure their outcomes. And so for so long, HR was never tied to data or used data to manage their business. And there's data out there on people, on engagement, and we should be using that to measure our outcomes and set our goals in place when we have it, and there's ways to get it.
Well, okay. So you're right. And whether it's modeling from the CEO's perspective, modeling if we were entered this market, what would happen? How much resource we'd have to put against it? What's the expected return? The CFO is always modeling financial outcomes and changes in the budget, and revenue's not coming in the way that we thought. So how do we have to, they live on modeling. Right? Your marketing people live on modeling. If we launch this campaign, what's the likely response rate? How's that can translate into sales, whatever. And you're right. People analytics, from a predictive way, I think maybe some descriptive, right? But predictive is a world away from descriptive.
Mm-hmm.
And if the science bears it out, being able to predict how someone is going to perform. So let's use that as a launching point, if you're cool with that. So when we were first getting to know each other, you were describing for me kind of a before and an after, that you guys had a previous, hiring and interview process, and that's actually changed and improved. Can you kind of give the before and the after, and we'll kind of get into the guts of it as you go?
Sure. And I feel like this, a lot of a lot of companies fall into this cycle of one, like you're interviewing the candidate. It is your choice, right? And you're like, no, they're interviewing you too. So that's a good first step is to realize it's a mutual interview. But so our interview process has always been to use assessments. We use that at the very beginning of our assessment of our interview process to help not filter candidates, but to identify which ones will most likely succeed in the job based on what we're asking them to do. And we do that through a behavioral assessment and job assessment. So we've always done that. And then we would have a hiring manager interview, which consists, or excuse me, an HR interview, which consists of like just the screening, making sure like salary and all that kind of stuff match. And then we would have a hiring manager interview. And then we'd get to the super day. And the super day was like a free for all of who wants to meet this candidate, what questions you want to ask. And a candidate would come in sometimes for like a full day. Now this was more on-site where pre-COVID, and which is great. You get to know them, they get to know you. We weren't very structured in ensuring that the same people weren't asking the same questions. So imagine you're a candidate and you go to like, I don't know, 4 or 5 interviews and you start with the same 6 things every single time. You're like, oh my gosh, I wish they would just talk to each other. And so we took a lot of time in getting candidate feedback on their experience. And through Glassdoor reviews, we had the candidates fill out an evaluation after their interview. And, even the candidates that got the job felt like that was a lot. And it wasn't necessarily always the most productive. And so over time, through lots of iterations, we've ended up in a more streamlined process where the maximum amount of super day time can be 4 hours max, even though it's on Zoom. And if it's on different days, 4 hours maximum. We get a hiring team together. We talk about who's asking which questions. There's interview guides in terms of who's screening for what. And then one of the most valuable interview portions that we introduced was what we call a culture interview. So we can talk about this later, but we have our cultural values defined. It's an acronym. It stands for THREADS. And so we train a group of employees that volunteer in how to do this cultural interview based on our core values. And they get to spend some time with a candidate. And the key here is that the person who's doing the culture interview is not on the team that the candidate is interviewing for. And this really gives the candidate more insight into what is this company that I'm joining versus this team. The team is important, but it's also like, what does it look like outside of the people I'll be working with? Am I hearing the same things? And it really gives the candidate a chance to ask some more general questions from an employee that just works at the company. And we found this to be a huge benefit for both the candidate and for us. And then at the end of if anyone makes it to this 4-hour interview, we send them a gift card afterwards for a coffee for spending time with us to really just thank them. Cool. Because they are taking some time out of their day to spend with us, and we appreciate that. So it's been an evolution over 6 or 7 years in terms of getting it right, but we really think that we're efficient. We give a good experience to the candidate. We always tell them when we're going to get back to them. We talk about this white glove experience.
So, okay, where did 4 hours come from?
So it was a lot of testing to make sure, one, that we had the right amount of time to get the information that we needed, and then a lot of candidate feedback around what did they expect was too much time to spend in an interview. And it doesn't always reach 4, right? Sometimes there's just 2 or 3 people that the person might need to meet with, but 4 was the maximum.
I'll tell you what, just from and people who know me outside of this podcast know that I devote a decent amount of time to helping job seekers. And, one of the key things is just like these really brutal interview processes. And, what might feel like a super day to you might be a super not great day from a experience perspective. I mean, seriously. And, to your point, like is there a process? Why did I just answer that question for the third time? Like I said, do you guys talk to each other? But what I think I would like to kind of dial into, because people are using assessments, and I do want to talk about the predictive index in particular, but you said that you use the instrument on the front end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not as a filter, but as a way of kind of, making sure this person's going to be a good fit for the role that we need. How do you use the assessment in the interview process? How does that shape the kinds of things that you might want to learn, and who's asking those things?
Sure. So typically, I'll just answer the last question first. Typically, it's the hiring manager that will talk more about like behavioral fit for the job with the candidate. And so one of the great tools that we have also is this job assessment. And what that does is it sends out a survey to all the stakeholders for the job. So just say that you're my manager or you're the hiring manager. So you would take it. And then maybe a key stakeholder in finance would take it. Mm-hmm. And then anyone on the hiring team, or not anyone, but some people on the hiring team. And that comes back. One, it shows, are all of the people that are going to be interviewing this person looking for the same thing?
Yes.
Just right? Because sometimes you're like, this person is not going to drive this process forward. And you're like, I wasn't expecting them to. Like, they're going to execute on things I asked them to. So now you're interviewing for two different things and the interview's over, right? So one, on the forefront of hiring, it gets everyone aligned to what is this job? Not even the person, like what's the job? So once the job is defined, then you can say to the candidates, so take a behavioral assessment, and the software will kind of just give, are they matched or not? And there's a numerical match of how close they are from a behavioral to job fit. And so just say that in this job, you're in a finance role, and detail orientation, rule following, and process following are really important to this job. And you get a candidate that might not have great attention to detail, but has everything else that you're looking for, is curious, has good attitude, has got some experience. So you're like, okay, let me find more out about this. And so then the software will do this, but the questioning around this comes to like, hey, this job requires, a lot of attention to detail. There's, it's really important to get the numbers right. Can you tell me about a time where you had to dig into the details, and how did you feel about that? Is this something that would drain you? Because we can all do jobs that are outside of how we're wired. Mm-hmm. And how we're driven. It's just like, how sustainable is it? Does it exhaust you? And so I think it's digging deep in there, but even knowing what questions to ask are so important, because sometimes you're like, and this is why we do it at the beginning too, because just say you're hiring for a sales job that requires lots of, social interaction and extroversion. Like, everyone is going to fall in love with someone who's social and can hold a conversation, right? You're like, this is great. But like, they might not be able to put pressure on to close a deal or negotiate. Mm-hmm. But if you've already kind of fallen in love with them because you had this great conversation and connection, you might be considering, oh, well, they'll figure that out. And it's actually, they're not going to be a successful salesperson. So it's those types of insights that just help you ask the question to learn more.
So I'm a big fan of assessments, and I have used Predictive Index in the past, and it's very, very, very good. And a couple things that come to mind, and I just think about, to your earlier point, like the biases. Like, I just like Jackie. She's so nice, right? She's friendly. I think she'd be a great culture fit here. And, if our flight got canceled, she'd be a fun person to talk to, so yeah, let's go. And so we have our biases. There's also a consistency kind of a thing, right? Because I might accidentally, luckily, maybe intentionally uncover the fact that details is not your thing. You're an amazing strategic thinker, but actually getting into the operationalizing of those things is not your lane as much. And you're right. When we can do stuff, we can kind of push through, but it's exhausting. And to do it repeatedly, that's going to come at a cost, right? Either the quality of work, burnout of the person, whatever. And you also have people from the candidate side. I really need a job right now. I'm going to say whatever I need to say, bounds to get hired. I need a job. This is a very tough job market. As you and I record this, this is not an easy job market, particularly for collar professionals. And that's everybody who's been laid off. So there's an abundance of supply. So, being able to kind of cut through either as the hiring person, my biases, or as the candidate, my desire to get an offer from somebody, having an objective, validated instrument to help is invaluable because the cost of a bad hire is real high.
Yeah, and imagine a scenario where you're hiring like 3 or 4 people in the same job. So you have 3 user support positions open, right? And they're all have different behavioral profiles. And you have lots of different projects and areas where they can shine and like need to take on. So you can hire your 4 people and like see how to direct the work, because now you know who's going to be more driven and excited and engaged in that type of work. So it's not like I said, it's not always a filter. It's kind of just gives you insight into how to best match the job to be done to the person who's predictably going to do the best with it.
Where do you guys see? Where would you counsel people how to not use an assessment?
If you're using it as a filter, I think that's wrong because people are complex and there's lots more than just an assessment. So if you're in an organization that isn't like fully trained, I would say, I can't imagine a world where I wouldn't use one. Like I don't think there's a scenario, but it's more about training. It's about the mindset and the openness to assessments and understanding the tool that you're using. So there's a self-awareness, like you should take the assessment yourself. So you understand who you are as well. So you can speak to it, but I can't, other than misuse, I can't imagine a scenario where I wouldn't use one.
When we're talking about, can you define filtering versus how to use it to prioritize candidates, or what's the distinction between filtering and how you use it?
Sure. So when I say you prioritize candidates, so just say, we just opened a product manager role. I think we had 250 applicants overnight, right? So you're like, okay, how do I manage and prioritize who I'm going to talk to? Because there's only so much time in a day, right? So you kind of look at resume and experience, then you send assessments to your top candidates that you want to talk to, and then you have a job assessment. So you're like, okay, I'm going to take the first 20 that are behaviorally driven or matched to this job. I'm going to talk to them first. So it just helps you prioritize when those situations happen. There's many times that, I remember over the last 10 years, we know we've been through so many ups and downs in the economy and in talent demand. But there were times we post a job and we're like 3 people came in for particular job. When software engineers were so hard to find. And then we're just use it as a tool to help us have a conversation about like, this is what the job is. This is, what we've learned about you, like, how are we going to navigate that, et cetera. And just being very open about it. So a filter would be like, oh, this person, their profile is not the one that is on this job assessment. So I'm not talking to them. That's just like hard stop. And we were just talking about this earlier, where I think a lot of HR departments or talent acquisition and professionals like filter out people on things like a gap in employment or a location where they might live or some story they've made up based on a resume. And, resumes are just one piece of information, experience is one piece, and there's so much more. So.
It's interesting. Let's talk about that because you're right. We were talking earlier about more skills-based hiring, and the resume is that the be-all end-all of things. I mean, first of all, you want to talk about a biased document. A resume is a highly biased document by its very nature and how it's intended to be used. So there's that. Um, can you talk to us a little bit about why you're more an advocate of skills-based, and how your fellow HR compatriots could be thinking about being maybe a little less direct experience? You've done this exact job for 8 years, and how we're looking more for attributes than we are exact experiences.
Yeah, and I'll use some real life examples. And I do believe that there's jobs where you need some experience. Like in most cases, you're going to hire a software engineer. You need to know how to code in some cases. So the example I'll use is that when Mike and Daniel, our president and CEO, acquired the Predictive Index, we sat in a room, the three of us, and we said, what do we want this company to be? What do we want it to feel like from a culture perspective? What do we value? How do we look at performance? And one of the things that we agreed to as we were going to build the company was that we cared about curiosity, and like, is a person smart and curious and want to learn? Do they have a good attitude? And we would not compromise on those two things. So the only thing we would compromise was on their job experience. And so we use that, right? So we're like, is this person capable? Are they good job fit? And where this plays out is over the course of my time at PI. It's been about 10 years. There was a time where we were trying to build our engineering department, and we're based in a suburb of Boston, and there was just no talent. We weren't in the city. No one wanted to commute. We were, in-person company. And so we had to be creative. So we hired people that were already in our company to become software engineers. So our current director of engineering is a former product marketer. He came to us for product marketing, and he's interested in coding. And he knew our business. He knew our science. We were like, we're going to have to teach that to someone anyway. So he wants to learn. And that's how we ended up. And that's, to this day, we are able to be so adaptable and flexible and maneuver with all of the changes and headwinds that we hit from what's happening outside of our control, because that's the mindset of like, anyone really, if they're curious and want to learn, we can teach them anything. And that's how we take it.
I want to just side note. There's a professor at Wharton who leads all of their HR school, if you will, named Peter Capelli. And he's actually written a book on this, and it's essentially around internal talent marketplaces. And, with all the layoffs and everything that are going on, because we've got people so rigidly identified as, I am a product marketer, therefore, and for whatever reason, we can think we can cut product marketing right now, that you're just cutting loose of somebody who is curious, is a great culture fit, great attitude, actually curious in the thing that we need people to be good at. And instead of letting that person go, we've actually figured out a way to reskill, upskill them, and keep a great talent. At the risk of making a sports analogy, like, I can't teach you to be tall. I can't teach you to be fast. I can teach you a position.
Right.
And
yeah. I love that. And, that's how we've been so successful. Like in December, our head of revenue gave notice. And then in January, our VP of sales followed him. And so we're like, what are we going to do? And we pulled in our VP of product design. It is now running our sales department, and it's been going swimmingly. So like understanding who's on the team, and people, are driven. Like this person happens to be what we call Maverick, and like work in ambiguity, loves curiosity, like to take on new challenges, likes to fix things. So it was like a perfect segue for her and two for us. And now we have, we didn't skip a beat, where a lot of companies would be like, we have to go hire someone.
Yeah, and pay big bucks to go lure them away from whatever they're doing. And it's like, why? This person's already in our company and knows us. We trust them, right?
And we had an answer for all the people on the sales team. We're going to be like, what's going to happen to us? right? And if you're hiring someone new, they're like, I'm not going to like that person. Let me go dip my foot in the water of a new job, right? And we didn't skip a beat. It was like the next day. So they knew exactly what was going to happen, and it was really worked out very well.
No, that's awesome. So uh, um, you talked about the cultural interview, and I wanted to go back to that real quick because that sounds like something that's worth learning a little bit more about.
Sure. So we have, I mentioned our values. It's an acronym, THREADS. It stands for teamwork, honesty, reliability, energy, action, drive, and scope. And each of those have definitions. So depending on the job or potentially whatever the hiring team has asked you to kind of dig in on, we'll talk about those things because they're important to us as a company. Like share with us a time where you've been a good teammate, or what does a good teammate look like to you? And, I think a big one for us is scope, especially as you start getting to leadership things. It's like, and scope for us means like, don't try and boil the ocean, and be able to call the scope card and be able to say like, I'm not going to be able to get to that. Or if I do that, I might not be able to get to something else. What are we going to move? And just getting some examples of how a candidate might think about those things. And then also giving them experience of what that looks like at our company, right? So like we have one of our values is like errors of action are better than errors of inaction. And so we're like, we want people to be empowered and comfortable making decisions when they don't necessarily have all the answers. We'd rather you make the decision in most cases, and we'll fix it later. We're in assessments. We're not, and we're in talent optimization. We're not, doing surgery. So we have a little bit of leeway here, but like in most cases, you're going to make the right decision. So go ahead and make it. And, we'd rather you take that error of action versus waiting around and not making a decision.
Yeah. So that's interesting. And that would be, back to personality attributes. Like, do you need complete information to be able to make a decision? And, there are assessments, and I'm sure you all do the same, they can get at things like that. And it's like, well, that's not our MO here. And you're going to be very uncomfortable. And it's not even a judgment. It's just that person might feel irresponsible putting something forward that's only 60% baked, and we'll figure the rest of it out in market, a little bit of ship and fix. And they're like, no, you can't do that. That's terrible. Like, you're knowingly shipping things out that aren't perfect. Well, if we wait for perfect, we're never going to ship anything out. And then to the extent we get to perfect and we put it out there, we figure out it's not perfect. Like, we just spent a ton of time and money aiming for something that wasn't realized.
Yep. Yeah. Then you can actually have these conversations, because we would still want that person to work at our company. We'd be like, okay, but now we know that. So we'll be able to help you. Like, Bob, I know that this isn't like, you don't have all the information. We're going to do this. How do you feel about it? Like, you can kind of get through that, because that that's the issue. It's not that the person, isn't doing their job. And sometimes it comes out as like performance. Like, Bob just won't make a decision. It's like, no, Bob doesn't have the information that he's comfortable with making the decision. And it's not about Bob. It's about the context of the situation in which how Bob can make a decision. Well, so yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it reminds me of a time when, and I think this again would be instructive for listeners. I remember presenting the strategy of the company to our analyst team. And of course, I was mostly the author of some of this stuff, so it was brilliant. and so I'm presenting all this stuff, and with a lot of enthusiasm and whatever. And it was just sort of like flatlining with these 15 people that I was presenting to. And I'm like, is it because you don't care, or you're too dumb to get it? And of course, it was neither one of those things. The way that this particular personality type that makes them amazing analysts is they need a little bit of soak time. They don't just viscerally react to things like I do. And so I'm missing the visceral reaction because that's what I'm comfortable doing. And for them, again, it's like, that's not even in my nature to do that. And if I was, it would be, again, not to overuse the word, irresponsible.
Yeah.
I haven't even really thought about it yet. I haven't kind of walked all the way around this thing to form an informed opinion. So I'll see you tomorrow after I've had time to think about it. And thankfully, she was great, a very young analyst, actually, just a couple of years into her career. She's the one that provided me that insight that you can see I've carried this many years forward of not everybody thinks the way that I think. That's not a bad thing. In fact, that's probably starting to get into the definition of diversity, right? Yep. And that's a good thing. But I appreciate what you're sharing. Go back to I think you also mentioned that the cultural interview is provided by somebody who's not on the team.
Yep.
And that reminds me of Laszlo Bach. I think his book is called Work Rules. He's the former senior VP of people at Google.
Yep.
They put a lot on people not in the department to make the hiring decisions. And you're not going that far. I'm not hearing you say that anyway. But somebody that's got input who's not on the sales team, and we're hiring a salesperson.
Yeah, and I will tell you that, we do have a no jackass policy, and that doesn't get tripped. So there have been times where, and it's typically not just a red flag in the what we call the threads interview. But there's a lot of influence in that. It's not just a nice to have and a touchy feely type of thing. Like, it's credible influence over whether or not someone can join. And so we do take time in working with the people who do those interviews and teaching them how to interview. And these are the types of things you should look for. And so.
Are you guys consensus based, or could somebody be a dissenting vote and we still go with the other candidate?
Yeah, I mean, it's the hiring manager. So that's the decision maker. People ops doesn't make the decision. I mean, we try and mediate a decision and get to a decision and make sure we're thinking about the big picture, but it's the hiring manager's decision for sure.
So we don't have to be unanimous?
Nope.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think I have some notion because we've talked about some of these, but specifically, Jackie, when you're interviewing somebody, I know this could change based on the role or the level or whatever, but generally speaking, what are the attributes that you're looking for in a candidate?
Sure. I like for someone to be prepared. I think someone shows up to the conversation and knows who they're talking to, knows a little bit about the company. I think that's important. Again, curiosity. I think asking questions about the company, the job, the manager, taking a real investment in the people that they're working with. Because when they're interviewing with me, unless it's a senior leader at the company, it's more of a, what's this company about versus the job. So I look for examples of where, they can provide where they've been curious, how they've made an impact, the work they like to do. So really can be self-aware. I think self-awareness is a big component of a good hire, because we're not all perfect and we do have interpersonal issues at work, no matter who we are. So being aware of that. So and like I said before, good attitude and curiosity above all, I think are great.
Awesome. And then as we start to land the plane here a little bit, again, there's a lot of HR professionals, people you would consider peers, listening to this. We're recording this in March of 2025. What advice do you have for your HR colleagues?
Yeah, I think we started this by saying it is a really difficult place to be as someone looking for a job. So a job seeker is really tough place because there's so many people out there and it's a little bit uncertain. So my advice to you is put yourself in those shoes and make sure that you're looking more beyond the resume. There's so much talent out there, and diversity of thought brings great ideas and innovation to companies. So look beyond the resume. Don't fill in the gaps with stories you've made up, like there's a gap in the resume, or something doesn't make sense. Just take the time to go explore that before just saying no. I think that what I hear a lot from candidates is a lot about ghosting or not knowing, going in for an interview and never hearing back, is set some expectations and give candidates the experience that they deserve as a candidate at your company, and let them know whether they're still a candidate or not. It's not that hard. I think just be open to more than just the resume we've found so much talent.
I was going to ask you about that, Jackie, because while I agree with that, and skills-based hiring is certainly in vogue to talk about right now, there's also sometimes a reluctance to actually act on that, because hiring by its very nature is a risky business. And if I go ahead and hire somebody that doesn't have the degree, who doesn't have the exact experience, and it doesn't work out, I've heard people say, I'm afraid of the blowback, that I took the risk, and I probably should have just hired the safer candidate, at least on paper, safer candidate. How would you respond to that concern?
Well, I mean, hiring in general is a risk. And I do agree, like there are, and I might have said this earlier, that in some cases it is, if there's candidates out there that have the experience to do the job and the skill sets, by all means, that is important and should be taken into account. But I think that, there's lots to learn at any company, no matter what. So I think about Salesforce administrator, for example. You could be a Salesforce administrator at one company and go to another company with your Salesforce experience and need to go to training, because every system is so different on a different version. So it's like you're going to have to teach them something. Yes. And so what is it that you're going to teach them? So, and sometimes, it is a risk, and it doesn't always work out.
Well, it's interesting too, because, it's like, I want you to be curious, but I want you to have done this exact job. It's like, but I'm curious. I want to learn new stuff. Yeah, that's awesome, but I just don't want to fund your education. So but I think the more enlightened approach is, we want people that want to continue to grow, that have a desire to grow, that have, a drive to continue to improve and get better and learn new things. I think it's going to be a much better hire, not even in the long run, I think probably in the short run, than, hey, this guy's plug and play today.
Yep.
Yeah, he already hit his ceiling, and we could have hired somebody else, and we could have gone much further with her, because she's got more drive and more capacity to continue to grow in the role as we grow.
Yeah, and I would say that in all of our senior leadership positions at PI, when we've hired externally, it's always been someone who hasn't had that job before. So we hired our VP of engineering, who was a director of engineering at Wayfair. So we wanted to find, this was the next job for them versus the person who had done it before.
Yeah.
And I will say, that's when we hire externally, but the majority of our leaders, from, directors to all the way to myself, are all promotions. We've hired from within, we've promoted and developed from within. And it keeps people on track everywhere in your company, because they see growth.
Yeah, well, I can't think of a better note to end on than growth. Is there anything that we didn't talk about, Jackie, that you just wanted to make sure that you shared before we let you get back to running a great company? No, I think that,
as I think about the future of work and the future of, hiring, and it's going to be an interesting, I think, next few years. And, whatever tools you can use to help navigate and set your organization up for success, like, take advantage of them. I think AI is going to be powerful. So, don't be a bystander in all of the things that we have to help us, make these critical decisions for our companies.
Exactly. And I do agree, and we'll end on this with Jim Collins, like, job one is get the right people on the bus. Yep. And tools like the Predictive Index can really help companies make much better decisions. So I really appreciate your time. This was so much fun. Like
Yeah.
you've clearly thought about this a lot. I learned a few new things, which I really appreciate. And I thank you. And I thank the listening audience. And again, Bill Banham at HR Gazette and all the good folks at HR Chat. Thank you so much for allowing me a few minutes to be the guest host. And with that, Jackie, I'll say thank you again.
Thank you so much. I could talk about this for days, so appreciate it.
Well, then we'll have to have you back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode of the HR Chat podcast is supported by Deal. Are you looking for an all-in-one solution to manage your global workforce? With Deal, you can easily onboard global employees, streamline payroll processes, and ensure local compliance, all in one flexible, scalable platform. Join thousands of companies who trust Deal with their global HR needs. Visit Deal.com today, that's DEEL.com, to see how you can start managing your global team with unmatched speed, flexibility, and compliance. Thanks, and we hope you enjoy this HR Chat episode.